Hi, everyone. We will go ahead and give it a minute before we get started. We got a lot of people jumping on still, so we'll give it about another minute and then we'll go ahead and start the last session for today. Okay, it looks like things are starting to slow down a bit with the numbers, so we'll go ahead and get started. I am Megan. I'm the Professional Development Coordinator here with ICPN. Today, Anne is going to be sharing with us or giving us a session on recognizing one's personal trauma. This is part of our DCFS series. This is the second time we've run through this series. So we had a couple of sessions earlier this morning. Tomorrow, just so you guys are aware, if you want, it's not too late to sign up. We will be having an Act for Caregivers session at 10 o'clock, followed by a Mindfulness for Caregivers session at 12. And then on Wednesday, the 17th, we will be having a session at 9 a.m. on recognizing the signs of maltreatment in children through a trauma-informed care lens, followed by a 10:30 session on stress and anger management, problem solving, and decision making. And then our final session will be from 1 until 2 o'clock on Wednesday, and that will be on understanding child development. As I mentioned, this is part of our DCFS series. So these are all really meant to be short little snippets and introductions really into these topics. So it's just kind of a quick overview, really. They're only hour-long sessions, just to kind of introduce the topic to everybody. Um, so if you're looking for more of our typical longer trainings, we will be returning to that format in January. Keep an eye out for some emails coming out with some exciting new topics that we have coming up beginning in January. And then also keep an eye out for information about our annual conference that will be coming up at the end of March. So information should start going out about that pretty early on in the new year. Um, and then finally, just as a couple reminders, your microphones are muted and your cameras are off. When we finish the session, you will receive a Zoom satisfaction survey that's going to automatically pop up at the end of the webinar. And that is just to kind of give us feedback on the session and ideas on upcoming topics you would like to us to consider presenting. And then after that, you will receive an email with a survey, with a link for a survey that you will need to complete in order to receive your CEU. You should get that within about 24 hours after the session. Normally it comes pretty quickly, so if you don't see it in about 24 hours, go ahead and reach out to me and let me know. But that again is the one that comes to your email is the one that you need to complete in order to receive your CEU. So please keep an eye out for both of those surveys. And we will hand it over to Anne. Feel free to use the chat and ask questions, engage with each other, and we will monitor the chat for any questions that come up and bring those up at the end. But thank you, Anne.
All right, thank you so much. All right, my name is Ann Reynolds. I'm the Director of Training here at Hope. I've been at Hope for 4 years in this role. I worked at Hope previously as well, so altogether it's been 10 years at Hope. I've worked primarily in the field of people with developmental disabilities for my whole career with children and adults in various settings. So I'm really passionate about this field and with training to make sure people have all the knowledge and information that they need. All right, so today we're going to talk about recognizing one's personal trauma. We will be talking about, okay, we're going to be talking about trauma, which is a topic that may be difficult or upsetting for some people. So if you need to take a break or step out from the training, please do so. I also want to thank some amazing people who helped share their insight and expertise with me for the creation of this training. These are some other people that work at Hope. I know some of them also do a lot of the ICPN training, so you guys may recognize their names. So Katie Doctor, Amy Burke, and Kelly Hall. A big thanks to all three of them. So we're going to start off and just talk about what is trauma. So just a little bit of basic information before we get too into this. So defining trauma, we all hear the word trauma, we know what trauma is, but this is a definition from the Trauma Informed Care Implementation Resource Center. So trauma is a pervasive problem. It results from exposure to an incident or series of events that are emotionally disturbing or life-threatening, with lasting adverse effects on the individual's functioning and mental, physical, social, emotional, and or spiritual well-being. So trauma is an event that leaves somebody feeling vulnerable, right? They're not feeling good. There can be one traumatic event or there can be a set of circumstances. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit and talk about some of the different categories of trauma. So the types of trauma, the first one is a single event or a type 1 trauma. And this is a single incident trauma. They come out unexpected. They're out of the blue. So this is something like a assault or a sexual assault, a traumatic loss, a mugging or a robbery, terrorist attack, natural disaster. These are all things that are very unexpected and they just happen one time. Maybe a military combat incident. It could be a hospitalization that was very traumatic for someone or other medical trauma, a post-suicide attempt trauma, a severe illness. So there's lots of things in addition to these that can be a single event trauma. The next type of trauma is a complex or a type 2 trauma. I can't talk today. Maybe it's because it's Monday. And a type 2 trauma is repeated, prolonged exposure to traumatic events where escape is difficult or impossible. So these are things that are more likely to be experienced over a length of time and repeated. They can be experienced as part of an interpersonal relationship or with a close attachment figure in childhood. So the person may feel trapped emotionally or physically, and they're more closely related to complex post-traumatic stress disorder. So some examples of this type of trauma are physical, emotional, domestic abuse, emotional neglect, abandonment, coercion, long-term misdiagnosis of a health problem, bullying, sexual abuse, overly strict upbringing. Another type of trauma is historical, collective, or intergenerational trauma. So this is a shared trauma experienced by a specific group. So this is a trauma that can have been passed down, and maybe the person that has the trauma wasn't even directly present during the original events. So it's the psychological distress experienced by a specific group that shares a history of trauma. And this could be something that's cultural or racial or ethnic or class related. Some examples are racism, slavery, forcible removal from a family or community, genocides, famine. So these can also include like natural disasters or other traumatic events. If we think about things in the history like the Holocaust, the Great Depression, even COVID-19, that was kind of a long-term traumatic event that has been passed down to generations. Another type of trauma is vicarious trauma. This is experienced when a person has continuous exposure to the traumatic events of others. So this is the experience of absorbing others' pain in times of their distress so deeply that it affects your own well-being. So it's closely related to concepts like empathy fatigue, secondary trauma, vicarious distress, and caretaker burnout. So some people that work in the fields of law enforcement or victim services, mental health professionals, ER healthcare workers, direct care staff, people working in the field of people with DD. So a lot of people in this field hear a lot about trauma, and that can cause trauma in you from hearing all of that. Childhood trauma. This is trauma experienced before the age of 18. All right, and this is also referred to as ACEs, which are the adverse childhood experiences. And this little picture that I have here talks about some examples of what are ACEs and what are some examples of these. So different abuse, chaotic homes, residential placement, being in the child welfare system, having repeated foster care placement, all these things can cause ACEs. So we're going to watch a little video. Hopefully you guys can hear the sound on this. All right, let's play it and see if it works. Wait, I don't hear anything. Do you guys hear anything?
No, we don't have
No, we
any
don't.
sound. I think,
All right, so we may just have to read this, guys. I'm not, it's really, the closed captioning is there that you guys can read along. I'm not sure what's going on with my audio. Sorry, I was trying to see if I could get this fixed over on my side, but I don't think I can. So I apologize for that, guys. I guess it's Monday. The video just doesn't want to play correctly, but this just really goes over what ACEs are and who's affected by ACEs. So let me switch to the next side. So I'm going to go ahead and stop it because I just think that was crazy that it wasn't playing at all. So most people have experienced at least one ACE in their life. ACEs can be passed down from generation to generation. So 16% of the US population report 4 or more ACEs, and they can happen to anyone. According to the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, over 2/3 of children report experiencing at least one traumatic event by age 16. And at least 1 in 7 children experience abuse or neglect annually in the US. So ACEs are things that happen really early and unfortunately happen to a lot of children and can have a lifelong impact. This next slide talks about this project, this Bucharest Early Intervention Project. I'm not sure if anyone has ever heard of this before. 136 children between 6 and 31 months who were in an orphanage in Bucharest were studied. So 68 of them were kept in an institution and 68 were placed in new foster care system. And then they also had like a control group of 72 children who with no history of institutional rearing. So the results, if you can see, versus the institution and foster care and biological, you can see the differences. So the people for access one disorders, like people who were in the institution had a much higher rate. Same with emotional disorders and behavioral disorders, and they had a lower IQ. So this shows that placement in foster care versus being in institution when the children are really young dramatically improves outcomes. We hear a lot, especially in other countries, about orphanages and, how many children are kept there. And that really has a lifelong impact. I actually have a brother that was adopted from Vietnam when he was a year and a half old. This was, right after the Vietnam War. And when my mom got him, like he was 1.5, but he didn't even know how to sit up. Like all he could do was lay down. Like he didn't know how to do anything yet. So he really had to start from square one, and that really impacted like his whole life, even after being adopted. So the next one is the little T trauma. So this says that smaller everyday experiences can be they're an expected part of life, but they can be traumatic. So this is really less prominent and less discussed. And this can be things like losing a job. That can be traumatic. I was laid off once. It was very traumatic for me, even though I didn't do anything to make that happen. It happened and it can be very traumatic. Sometimes having to move to a new house, maybe it's by choice or not choice. Those things can have an impact on you. And those smaller T's can add up and have a really big impact. So it's important to remember that trauma is not what happened to you, it's how it made you feel. So we can't ever downgrade somebody saying like, oh, this was so traumatic for me. And you're like, what's wrong? That's not that big of a deal. Everyone experiences trauma differently. And so I think I really like this quote because it's how it made you feel. And we all feel things differently. And sometimes a single event can be multiple kinds of trauma. And so when I was thinking about that, I thought about 9/11 responders. So, they had the single event trauma, but then also, it was also a collective and a generational trauma because that was passed down. So there's really high numbers of people who were first responders for the World Trade Center who still are dealing with, a lot of symptoms of PTSD and still have that trauma from that time. All right, so now we're going to move on and talk about some of the effects of trauma. So trauma is experienced on a spectrum, and the effects of that trauma are different for different people. So some people will experience a traumatic event and go on with their lives without lasting negative effect, and others will have difficulties and experience traumatic stress reactions. So how someone responds to a traumatic experience is personal, like I just was talking about. So if there's a strong support system and little or no prior traumatic experiences, if the person has a lot of resilience and a lot of resilient qualities, the traumatic event may not affect them as somebody who has some of those things already or has little support in place. So these are some of the effects of trauma. So physical effects, chronic pain, headaches, back pain, GI issues, difficulty concentrating, changing in eating and sleep patterns, like doing too much or too little of either or both of those things, inability to feel focused or balanced. I think sometimes people forget about the physical effects that trauma can have. So there's emotional effects. So feelings of shame or guilt, irritability, being overly sensitive to nonverbal cues. So not wanting someone, I might go up to somebody and touch them on the shoulder. Hey, how are you doing? And somebody's really sensitive to that kind of thing or sensitive to certain hand gestures. Somebody could be hyper vigilant, have heightened emotional responsive, so easily get defensive, easily become aggressive. Some mental health effects are feelings of wanting to self-harm, which obviously if that ever happens, someone needs to get immediate help. Depression and or anxiety, nightmares and flashbacks, increase in risky behaviors such as alcohol or drug use. Effects on relationships are excessive fear of others, sense of vulnerability, having trust issues, and social isolation. So a lot of us have heard of fight or flight. There's a few things they've added into this that are fight, flight, freeze, fawn, and flop. Now I'll start with F. So then, of course, I have a hard time saying them when I'm saying them all together. So the next slide talks a little bit, we're going to talk a little bit about each one of these things. So flight is characterized by a surge of adrenaline and a readiness to confront the perceived threat, right? Anger, aggression, like that urge to protect yourself. Flight is the desire to escape or to avoid that perceived or real threatening situation. So, you're running away, avoiding, just seeking distance from the situation, not wanting anything to do with it. freeze is when a person feels immobilized or stuck. So really like you feel very overwhelmed. You do nothing. You don't escape it. You don't want to fight it. You just do nothing. Fawn is the strong desire to please or appease others in the face of trauma. So, like people pleasing behavior, seeking to always be agreeable and helpful, and maybe even doing this to one's own detriment. And flop is the state of total surrender or total collapse during a traumatic situation. So it's those feelings of hopelessness and helplessness, like a sense of resignation, like this is going to happen. There's nothing I can do about it. This is really a newer concept to add to these other ones that we've all probably heard of before. So, I think this kind of gives a good overview of some of the effects of trauma. So now we're going to talk about how trauma can affect caregiving practices. So I liked this quote that I found online. Regardless of the type of trauma a person has experienced, I got a typo in there. Traumatic experiences impact relationships. So some possible caregiver behaviors. Doesn't mean these are going to happen. These are just some possible caregiver behaviors. Are difficulty responding consistently and positively. So responses are all over the place. There's not a lot of positive responses. Being less sensitive to the child's needs. When a child cries, not responding to that. That lack of responsiveness, like I just said. Difficulty with communication. So communication isn't clear. Communication isn't reliable. The child doesn't know what to expect. Hypervigilance. So like you're always on guard, you're expecting to be hurt by others, which can then lead to the habit of pushing people away before they can even hurt you or hurt your child. So you just don't want anyone else in your circle. Some other possible caregiver behaviors are trouble regulating emotions. So experiencing intense emotional reactions such as anger or irritability, which can spill over into your interactions with others. Like I said, increased irritability and anger, just really easy flying off the handle at things that really shouldn't make someone mad. Increased harshness and punitiveness, and increased risk for committing abuse or neglect. So, for parents, there are direct associations between PTSD symptom severity and the child abuse potential. So a growing body of literature has really shown that there is a link with these. So parents with a lifetime history of PTSD compared to those without PTSD were more likely to report the use of moderate, like pushing, to severe physical acts towards their child. So some possible negative outcomes for family functioning are instability, disorganization, and chaos. So just like difficulty to get a sustained, like an organized, stable schedule. Like, there's always so many things to do during the day, just like not able to get through all those things you can do in a fairly organized way. Mistrust. Like I said before, you just don't want people around. So then the family becomes very small and doesn't have the support of others. Even emotional distance between family members that are of your immediate family. Just that people in the family feel like they're walking on eggshells, like nobody knows how the person or the caregiver is going to react. And this can also be applied not just to families, obviously, but to like caregivers in, group homes or at schools or other places where there are caregivers. So, you want someone who you don't feel like you're walking on eggshells around. So some positive negative outcomes for the child are increased stress, decreased healthy development, that intergenerational trauma, which I talked about before, is a negative outcome for the child. The child or the teen may take on the role of the caregiver or the parents. So they're always trying to save and help the parent, behaving in a way that's too old for their age. Then they have difficulty fitting in with their peers. Feelings of being unloved, lonely, and ignored. Difficulty forming attachments with others. So, research shows that children and teens raised by parents with untreated PTSD are at a higher risk for a multitude of problems socially, academically, and relation. They can have difficulty with things like sitting in class and concentrating. They might have poor academic performance, increased disciplinary action. Having had like an emotional roller coaster in home, they're going to have more problems with making friendships, and forming those close attachments in school. So I hate this word, exasperating, I can't say it. You guys can read it. Some of these conditions. So a child with a disability, a mental health, or behavior disorder. If you already have a child that has some conditions that can make it harder sometimes, to parent them, that can just make things worse. Poverty, substance abuse by the parents, chronic stress, violence in the home, or just being in a violent community. So self-awareness. So this does not mean that just because you experience trauma that you're going to have these struggles. So if you're aware they could happen, then you're more likely to recognize them if they do occur and take actions to correct them. I like this quote that knowledge is power, information is liberating, education is the premise of progress. So when you know and you can fix it, then things are going to be better. There are some studies that show that trauma-exposed caregivers that have had treatment actually can show more support and protection and sympathy for their child and when responding to that child's distress because they've done the work and they know what to do. So now that we've talked about all those things, we're going to switch gears a little bit and talk about, well, what can you do? All right, so the first thing that you can do is know your stressors and your triggers. So what are stressors? So a stressor is any event, situation, or stimulus that causes a stress response. So this can be things that are financial or social, or things that are due to life changes. So if we all think about our lives, you guys just put a few things in the chat, like what is a stressor for you? Money, right? Like that's a huge stressor. I know it is for me as well. That's a big one. And I think that is a holidays, change, exactly, like all these things. And sometimes it can even be good change, right? Like even good change is stressful for me. Family dynamics, kids' health, just any health, time management. So all these things that go on in our lives, a lot of times every day can be things that are stressors. And it's good for us to know what our stressors are. Technology, yeah, like for me today, technology is a stressor. Like exactly, like these are all things that can be stressors. Just society, parents' health, chores. I've been through times in my life that I had a lot of change, and even though it was positive, it was still really stressful for me. I bought a house, like moved to a new city. You got people probably done this too, and you get a new job like all at the same time. Like those might all be good things, but they're still stressors. So I think as long as we know what our stressors are, then we're able to handle them better when those stressors do come along. So I know like, okay, this is going to be a big change. I need to mentally like prepare myself for it before it actually happens. So thank you everybody for all your comments in the chat. So some examples of some stressors. So lack of social support. Maybe just not having anyone that you can talk to. Like that can be a big stressor. If someone's in therapy and they're not making progress, like that could be a big stressor because, like, why aren't I doing better? And this can also go with lack of progress with health. Like, if you're having a health concern and it's not getting better, that can be a stressor. Dealing with the loss, a specific time of year. I know somebody wrote holidays up there, but sometimes just winter. Like, for me, that's a little bit of a stressor as well just because I don't like the cold. I don't like the dreariness. For some people love it. It's not for me. And dealing with life changes like we talked about. So there's all different things. And what stresses me out for another person may not affect them at all. So that's why it's really important that we all know ourselves well enough to know what our stressors are. Another thing that we should know is like, what are triggers? So a trigger is something that prompts a strong or unexpected emotional reaction or causes someone to experience memories of previous trauma. So anything can be a trauma trigger. It could be like a sound or a song or a smell. They say smells are really a big sense that brings about a lot of memories, and I think we've all experienced that. So trauma emotions are re-experienced through triggers. So emotions such as fear and shame are then experienced again. So it's important if someone's experienced trauma, either us or someone that we're working with, one of our clients or the individuals we work with, that we try to know what those triggers are. So some different types of triggers. There can be internal triggers, which are things that are happening within your body. So these can be like if you're feeling lonely for something not at all related to the trauma, it can bring about those thoughts and the feelings of when you had the trauma. Also feelings of frustration or sadness, just having memories of the event. External triggers like situations like we talked about, some of those things like the sounds or the smells. I know sometimes people talk about loud bangs or fireworks. There was a young man where I worked once. He was pretty new to the program I was working at. He was real young, like 7. He didn't talk a lot. He just had been there a little bit of time. And somebody in the kitchen like dropped a big pot. Like it was very loud. And he like slammed himself flat on the ground and like put his hands over his head. And we were like, what's going on? Like, what's happening? And then when we looked back and, thought more about it and read more about and learned more about him, we realized like he grew up in an area in Chicago where there was a lot of gun violence. And so to him, that loud noise triggered like this could be a gunshot. And even though he was only a little kid, like 6 or 7, and he had a developmental disability, like he knew and he was traumatized by that. And I think sometimes people don't think about, like we already talked about kids, but people at all different functioning levels, experience trauma. And so it was good for us to know that about him. So if there was a loud noise, we could reassure him, what it was and that everything was going to be okay. Um, it broke my heart when it happened. It was very sad to see. So there's also symptom triggers, like sometimes a physical illness or lack of sleep. And we all know how that makes us feel if we're not sleeping enough, not eating enough. Like those things can all be triggers. So the way to identify a trigger is it's not always going to be obvious. It could be pretty subtle because there can be a delay between the trigger and the feelings or the memories of that previous trauma. One thing to think about is like, does that reaction make sense for the situation? So like that little boy, like going to the ground flat on the ground the way he didn't make sense for a situation of somebody dropping a pot in the kitchen, right? So that helped us identify that that was a trigger for him. So if we're looking for our own triggers or for triggers for others, those are just some things for us to think about. If you're looking for your own trigger, you could also ask someone that you trust, like, tell me if you notice me acting differently. Did you see me act that way? Was that appropriate for the situation? But also be patient because, like, identifying a trigger, I know people who work in the field of DD or in other fields know it's not very easy to just like find it immediately. So how to deal with triggers, remove them if possible, even temporarily. Breathe slowly and deeply. Focus on your five senses. I know that that's something that, a lot of times clients are taught to do. Like if you're having that reaction, and so think about what do you currently see, what do you hear, what do you taste, touch, and smell, because that really brings you back to the present moment and brings you out of that memory of the trauma that you had. Redirect or distract yourself by something else or help someone else redirect or be distracted. Reach out for help. So help from a loved one and or a professional, call a crisis line if you need to. And now we're going to move to the next section, which is how to cope. So what do we do, or what do we help people do? So self-care, I know we talk about self-care a lot. I mean, it's a lot of things that we think about and talk about. Oops. Ooh, I went too far on that. Okay. So what are some things, if you guys just want to drop some things in the chat, like what are some things that you guys do for self-care? And thanks for that fun fact, Lindsay, that smell is the only scent that has a direct path to the hippocampus. Oh, I'm going to have to add that to this. I love it. So set boundaries. Love this. Get a massage, yoga puzzle, and getting my nails done. Oh, this person is, oh, look at Megan running and training for 5Ks. Like that's very impressive. Gratitude, walk in the woods. Yeah, facial, disconnect from my phone. Like that's a huge one. Take time off, and either that's time off work, just time off of doing other things. That can be any kind of time. Yeah, time for myself alone without the kids. Yeah, those mindfulness activities, those are huge. Reading a book. Sometimes even if it's just 15 minutes of self-care, it doesn't have to be an all-day spa day. Just having these things that are hair wash and head massage. Oh, that sounds amazing. I'm all up for that. That sounds great. So there's all kinds of things that we can do. Sometimes they cost money, sometimes they don't. It's really whatever works for you and knowing what your self-care is. A period of time away from social media. I think that's huge because as we all know, they've shown that that really can be very detrimental to our mental health is being on social media too much. So all these different things are great ways for us to do some self-care. And I'm going to thank you guys for all your comments in the chat there. That was great. All right. So good diet and rest, exercise and take care of yourself, setting limits. I know somebody said that. I have a sibling who will text me nonstop all day because she doesn't work. And so I have to turn my notifications off because the text messages could be just like 3 words instead of writing a full paragraph. It'll be like each line is 3 words. And in a minute, I could have gotten 20 texts. So for my own mental health and self-care, I turn off her notification. So I'll read the text when I have time, but I don't have to hear the constant binging of my phone. Laughing, right? I mean, that's huge. I think that's so important. And developing strategies to reduce stress. Attending to those needs of ourselves is really important before we can attend to the needs of others. So this little thing just shows self-care is what works for you. Whatever it is you need, from something small to something bigger, it's all great because that means that it works for you. Charge your battery. I like this little picture because none of us will let our phone battery go without a charge, right? Oh my gosh, I'm so particular about making sure my battery's charged in my AirPods and my phone. But that applies to us as well. We have to charge our own batteries in order to be there for other people. Building a support system. So family, friends, support groups, whatever community resources, whatever that support system is. Like I talked about earlier, sometimes people who have experienced trauma want to push people away. And that's actually the opposite of what you need. You really need people who are pulled in, who are support for you. But you do want to avoid engaging in a pattern of unhealthy relationships or, making those really poor choices in partners that just keep making you experience that same trauma again and again. So seeking professional help. So a crisis hotline, a therapist or a counselor, even a physician just to help you know, like, well, where do I go next? Here's how I'm feeling. What can you do to help me? Who can you refer me to? Therapy can always provide a safe space. A lot of agencies have like employee assistance programs where you can start just getting some free assistance as well. Um, so some other tips are to maintain that healthy work-life balance. And I know we hear about this all the time, so it's much easier to talk about it than to do it sometimes. But I think realizing what works for you, right? Having a daily routine and structure. Focus on what you can control. And I know we talk about this a lot, even with working with individuals, like, everybody wants to have some control and some things they can control. And share some basic information about your struggles. So if you're a person that's experienced trauma, it can be helpful to talk about your trauma with loved ones if they're at an age to understand it. And you don't have to tell everything at once, but loved ones are going to notice your stress and your emotion. So it can be helpful to create time for them to ask questions. Like tell them what's age appropriate for them. Let them know what the trauma was, even if it's just real basic, that, I was hurt in the past, how it affects you. You don't need to get into scary or graphic details. Just tell them how they can support you. When I'm feeling this way, something that you can do is blank. Just being very open and honest about it. Creating hope, letting, the kids, your loved ones know like trauma treatments work. I am getting better. These things help. I think that really helps people, just that openness, as much as you're willing to share, just so your loved ones know like where you're coming from, because they're going to notice, when things are different and when you're acting different. So the summary is like children or individuals that we're working with, they don't need a perfect parent or a caregiver. They need someone who provides them with love and support in a healthy, structured, and safe environment. Like none of us are perfect. We just have to do the best we can do with what we have and get the help we need in order to make us the best caregiver and parent that we can be. So does anybody have oops, before I get to the references, does anybody have any questions um, that they'd like to ask? I do have a lot of references that I've used for this training. So if anybody wants afterwards, for me to send them like my list of references, I'm going to put my email address in here. Um,
Yeah, I haven't seen any questions come up. There were some comments about, the five F's, the fight, flight, freeze, fawn and flop, that fawn and flop are new ones that people weren't aware of previously.
oh,
I know fawn's been around for a while. I think flop is the newest addition to that.
yeah,
Um,
yeah, I think so too. I think
yeah.
we're just we're always learning more.
Hmm.
Like it just started with fight or flight, and it's just we learn more and more about all these things that, can affect us and how
Exactly.
trauma can really affect us throughout our whole lives. So I've got a lot of references here of, places that I found a lot of the information. Because there's a lot of information out there, it's just kind of weeding through it and getting to, just like anything else.
There is a question that just came in here. Does it help to actually tell others about our struggles when they are having a hard time, or should we just acknowledge?
You mean when someone else is having a hard time?
Um, yeah.
Yeah. So I think that really just depends on the situation, right? Like it depends on what is your relationship to the person. So if I am if I'm a person who's serving that person or supporting that person, then maybe, not. Maybe that's not the correct place. But if it's a loved one or a friend, then maybe, yeah, that is a good time for you to share some of your experiences. So I think that's a really good question that you had. And I think unfortunately, it's just really situation based on your relationship with the person, how well you know them, and how comfortable you feel with sharing that. Um,
And I
and
think
I
like
think,
from, oh, sorry, Ann.
okay. No, go ahead.
I was going to say from, a clinical perspective, my background is clinical social work. And so I think, a piece of that too is to be careful not to try to like get in that one-upping game, right? Where like
Yeah,
whose trauma was bigger, whose trauma was more significant, and I think more often than not, if someone's trying to share their trauma, it's best to just let them share, give them the space, if you're open to hearing it.
right.
If it's too much, it's okay to tell people that too. If you're not the right person to be hearing that or taking that in or in the right mindset. But I think um rather than, trying to share your own to try to encourage someone else to share theirs, I think you just have to play it so carefully, really.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And like I said, it's the relationship I have. It's like my best friend, it would be totally
Hmm.
different than if it's an individual I'm providing services for, you know.
Yeah.
Um,
Someone just asked if someone is struggling but refuses to get therapy for any long-term help, what do we do to help them?
Megan, you have anything you,
That's another tough one. I think we can't
yeah,
force someone to get help. We can all we can do is lead a horse to water, right? We can't force it to drink. Um, so I think,
yeah, that's,
if you've shared resources, shared information, suggested therapy, sometimes, depending on who the person is and the relationship, sometimes people are willing to go to therapy together. It can be helpful to have someone else in there with them because it can feel really overwhelming to start that process. Um, but I think
yeah.
that, again, it depends on the person and the relationship, whether or not that would even be appropriate. I
No,
think,
I think that's great. I think you definitely are
I think
completely right.
having resources, if someone is struggling, there are some good references and resources in here that may be helpful. A book that I think is great, and I've recommended this for a number of the people I work with, is by Judith Herman. Um, oh my gosh, and I'm drawing a blank on it. Hang on, let me Google it really quickly. If anyone knows it, drop it in here. Give me 1 second and I will look it up.
Yeah, and I can share.
Trauma and
I think.
recovery.
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry,
That's it.
Megan.
Sorry,
I thought
it's
you were
trauma and
looking it up.
recovery. That's a really good, just good book, even for a loved one to read. Not, it's good for people who've experienced trauma, but it's also a really good book for caregivers or someone else to read to understand what someone might be going through who has experienced trauma. And I can drop that in here as well.
Yeah, and I think somebody asked about like a PDF of the references. I think we can't we could get you some information about the references that were used and some of these links that were used.
Yeah, if you
Um,
can get me a PDF, I can definitely send that out. And I'm gonna
yeah, I
drop
can
the
give
name
you a
of the book in
PDF of
here.
just the references and the links.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah, give me, I just want to make sure I'm spelling her name correctly. Yeah. Um,
oh, yeah, no, that's great. Thank you, Megan.
yeah, no problem. That was a book I read in graduate school when I was taking my trauma courses, and it's definitely stuck with me and one I've recommended to a number of people. Um,
Yeah, and I think it's so good to have good resources because there's so much
mhm,
out there. It's like weeding through it to try to find like what's actually a good resource can be really hard to find.
mhm. Um, Bridget asked if there's any research on trauma in the nervous system. I know there is because I know that it can have a lasting impact. I just don't know any research off the top of my head on that.
Yeah, same. That's what I was going to say too. I know that it does impact the nervous system. I just don't know like a name of a research or anything to read specifically about that. Because like I said, they really are just finding more and more about what trauma
Mhm.
impacts, like every facet of your being. Yeah, yeah, so much research. It really
Mhm.
is.
And if you
So,
go
and
to our webpage, the either the ICPN website or our site on YouTube, there are some past trainings that we've done that are definitely more in depth on trauma. Again, these are just kind of those very brief snippets of trainings, introductory trainings to topics versus like those deep dives. And we do have some trainings on trauma and supporting people within the population, the IDD population and trauma, that you may find helpful. And that is one that is definitely in high demand, so we can definitely look into getting that on the calendar in the upcoming year, doing some more trainings on trauma. Unfortunately, the person who did a lot of our trauma trainings is leaving, so we'll have to kind of ask around the teams and find someone new who can do some fresh research on it and present something. Um, I saw someone raise their hand, but we don't have the option to really call on people. So if you have a question, please do drop it in here. Yes, that's Jen, that's another great book and resource. The Body Keeps the Score, by Sean Pratt. And then someone else suggested Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog is another great book about trauma. Um,
I've never heard of that one.
no, me either. Yeah, there is a lot of research out there, obviously. But yeah, definitely let me drop our website in here too. Um, so you can find some of the trainings. Um,
Yeah, you guys have a lot of really good stuff out there, Megan, about trauma.
yeah, it's definitely, we've covered a wide variety of topics. So, hopefully there's some trainings in it that you may find helpful for those of you that were looking for more resources as well. And we can definitely, if we can get a PDF put together, we can send that out, to everybody who
Yeah, I can make that for
participated.
you. I can do that tomorrow morning and send it over to you.
Perfect, perfect. So keep an eye out for that. Um, any other questions? I love it when people share resources that they're aware of. I always think that's really helpful. Um,
Yeah, no, it's great because we're all trying to do the best we can, right, with the information we
yeah,
have. So the
and
information we have,
learning
the better.
together.
Yeah, I mean that's what it's really all about. Um,
Absolutely.
well, I really appreciate everybody who was on the training, from my standpoint. I know Megan's got a few closing remarks to say, but I want to
Mhm.
thank you guys, everybody, for paying attention and really, having your input.
Yeah, thank you all so much. And like I said, we really appreciate the questions and the dialogue. It's a great way to keep sharing and keep learning, and again, the recommendations of resources. Um, So yeah, just as a reminder, when we log off, you will get a survey will automatically pop up on Zoom. Um, Give us your feedback in there. If there's questions or trainings you'd like to see around trauma, specific topics around trauma, put it in there, please. Trauma is a very, very broad topic, obviously. So it's hard to say like, yeah, we'll do a trauma training, but if you can give us some specific ideas, we can absolutely look into that and have someone work on putting something together. Um, but so yeah, please give us your thoughts on that Zoom survey that'll pop up. And then again, keep an eye on your email. And you will see another survey come, and that's the one that you need to complete in order to receive your CEUs. Again, that's a requirement from the state that we have to complete those surveys to give out CEUs. Um, Again, tomorrow we do have two trainings in this DCFS series. We have one on ACT for caregivers, I believe at 10, and then mindfulness for caregivers at 12. And then on Wednesday, I got to get off the list because it's too many to remember. Um, here it is. Um, on Wednesday, we have recognizing the signs of maltreatment in children through a trauma-informed care lens. At 9, stress and anger management and problem solving and decision making at 10:30, and then understanding child development at 1 o'clock. So if you're looking for any more topics in the CCFS series, check those out, and it's not too late to register for them. So please feel free to do so, and keep an eye out for an email from me as well with the PDF with the resources in there. I should be able to get that out to you guys tomorrow at some point. Someone just added in the chat the difference between freeze, flight, fight, and those two new ones would be interesting. Oh, that's a great idea for that topic. Yeah, I can definitely make note of that. Um, yeah, thank you for that. Let me make a copy of that really quickly. Um, but yeah, thank you all so much for your participation today, for joining in and your input. We always really appreciate that. Um, and I hope everybody has a wonderful rest of your day. Stay warm. It's getting up into the teens here, so we're kind of excited about that in Rockford.
Right. It's
Um,
the big time.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
how I feel there too. Woo!
Yeah, yeah. But yeah, we look forward to seeing some of you tomorrow and Wednesday for the conclusion of our DCFS series. So thank you so much, Anne, for sharing this with us.
Oh yeah, thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.
Bye.